So, DeShone, a lot of topics to get into, ranging from your football career and business and everything in between. But I figured we start on a different note, and that's from a Facebook post that you had back on May 24th, 2011. And that Facebook post reads, "Gosh, I think I might pursue motivational speaking. Those people make millions, and I'm halfway decent at it." Motivational speaking, what was the motivation behind that?
May of 2011 would have been my sophomore year, just finishing up baseball season. I'm probably coming off of a high of playing JV baseball as a sophomore and doing pretty well that year. So probably had a little more too much confidence to be posting that on social media. But that was just a kid who was confident, who believed in everything he was doing, who hadn't been told no much and had accomplished a lot. Playing varsity football and baseball that year. Some guy probably came in, was on stage, and I probably thought I was smarter than him and thought I could go out there and outspeak him.
Is that something that you might still want to pursue, or are those days behind you?
I think they're behind me, man. It's a balancing act. I have whether I should or not, I'm always thinking about, what life after football actually means to me. And if I'm going to, make the decision to leave the game early, I'm going to make the decision to choose, Notre Dame over some other universities, then I think I need to make sure that I'm doing something a little bigger than just the average trek, which in my opinion, don't get me wrong, I know that it's difficult to get to the top in the sports media game, but I would see that as something that would be expected of me, to go into sports and think that I can go talk it. I'd rather do something that's, unexpected and try to go, climb some mountains that the average athlete doesn't climb.
So what, I guess, kind of piggybacking off that, what's your opinion on athlete podcasts and the state of where sports media is at today?
I love it. If you are all in on ball and if you're all in on your sport, with the help of NIL, I think that every athlete now is getting to probably the college level and realizing that they're more of a business than they are just, an athlete, a product out in the field. So if you're all in on ball and you plan on winning a lot of championships, the easiest avenue to treat yourself like a business is to own your own, distribution, to use your brand in a way that allows you to monetize. So for those who are out there who have, who are focused in on, having long careers, 10, 15-year careers, I love what Draymond's doing. I love what with Podcast P and Paul George. I love what New Heights is now. I think that, for the first time ever, there's this unfiltered lens of, the perspective of the athlete into, their life versus someone's, curated and created perspective from the typical media outlet. So I love what it's doing for the business. So as I say that, I didn't want to be a motivational speaker, it's less that I think that it's not a great market to be into. I'm a big fan of it. I just think personally, I'm not just an all ball guy. So I think that doing that would be something that once again might be expected of someone who you rather consider all ball.
Yeah, I think it's really cool because to something that you said, for the longest time, it was only one perspective, and it was the perspective of a journalist or an interviewer. And you never really got the firsthand experience of the athlete besides, your documentaries or, specifically curated content like that. But now you get this whole different perspective where, to your point, the Paul Georges of the world, the Pat Bevs and all these other people, New Heights, you get their direct experience from a certain game or a certain, whatever they're going through. And I think it's really cool. And I think it's a good balance because someone like myself who's an outsider, I think I can offer a perspective maybe as an interviewer that perhaps another, football player, basketball player might not be able to offer versus, they obviously have a much different perspective as well. So I think it's a really cool mix. I think ultimately it's great for sports media.
I agree. The best content that I think that's out there that I consume is podcasts. Raw, it's long, it's, doesn't have the opportunity to be, combed through and turned into some crazy sound bites. And to now have guys that are accepted of doing that while in the season, I think is the best part. That's maybe doing it in the off season and having a media career, off the field. And the off season is something that has been around for a while, but now you're starting to get these, true unfiltered perspectives that are telling you the insides and outs of exactly how Pat Bev feels today after, a loss and, game 40 of a long season. That perspective is one that I think brings players closer to fans and ultimately allows for the players to have, just more ownership of their brand. Once again, I think that we now live in a world where the word equity is the buzzword that's going around the locker room. It's no longer, 5-year contract, stay here, camaraderie, legacy. But now it's, as we start to flip the script and realize that, we are a product that drives revenue for, a bigger entity, the more that we have that information and understand how that works, the more, we want to now start to own our, connection, our pipeline to the fan. And that's ultimately where you can make money long term from.
Speaking of equity, I have to ask, because I think I read this story somewhere about Curry, and someone was basically making the argument that Curry should own equity in the Warriors just because of how much value he's brought to that team. You can make the same argument with Mahomes and the Chiefs, or, insert any big name star in their respective team. What's your opinion on that?
I guess the logical next step, right? The more that athletes are realizing that, once again, that their time is short and that they need to maximize as much as they can, the more that you get 1-year deals, the more that you see people who are chasing the money and not necessarily the team or the championship. So if you have incentives that now have flipped to being more about me as the athlete rather than us as the team, now the only way in the business world to align incentives with your employees is to offer equity. That's why startups from day one, offer, a pool of, 10% of the business to get their top guys signed up early on, knowing that if we both own this together, we both have, the best interest of the business in mind long term versus, me paying a CEO right now to come take my job and giving him, $1 million a year, knowing that he can just bounce out of this job and go take the next, C-suite job, next year and not care about what the long-term effect of the business is. So now that's, equity becomes a big thing. Business becomes a little more, apparent in conversations with athletes. I do think that the next gig for a business or for a team is to, align incentives with their star player, with their legendary player, probably save some money off the salary cap, and ultimately, build something that lasts longer than just them playing on that team.
Yeah. Well, we'll get back to business towards the end of this interview. Obviously, want to spend some time talking about what you're doing with your business. But before we get there, I think the audience deserves a little snippet into your journey to football and kind of how you got to the NFL, because I think a lot of people know DeShone Kizer as the quarterback for the Browns, who, let's face it, a lot of people label you as a bust, as someone who didn't live up to the hype, as this savior that the Browns were looking for a long time in the quarterback position. But before the NFL and before all that happened, you're just a kid sitting in your dad's car when he told you that basically he's not paying for your college and you either have to go to the military or get an athletic scholarship to be able to go to college. So take me back. I believe you were 12 when that happened. So what was hearing your dad say that? What was your initial reaction?
One was fear. That's exactly what we wanted to strike. It was like, hey, I know I'm not going to the military, so that can't be it. So from there, the first feeling was fear in that car, because it was a response to me not wanting to go to an AAU practice and drive an hour and a half to go play defense for a couple hours and then have to drive home. So I didn't like that. But ultimately, that story that I share is one that's like the most pivotal moment in my life. It shaped every decision that I made for, the next, decade and a half, going through high school or going through middle school into high school into college. The only thing that I had in mind was I'm going to go get the best degree possible. With that framework that my dad gave me, every decision that I made in terms of major decisions, had that as a structure to the conversation. Did you do something today to, get a better college degree? Not did you do something today to become, Michael Jordan or to become, Tom Brady, Cam Newton, or whoever I was looking up to at the time. But it was, did you do something to, once again, have the grades and have the resume to be able to go to a good school and get a good degree and ultimately, set myself up for the rest of my life in a way that could be maybe a percentage better than what we were doing as a family. Grew up in a working class family in Toledo, Ohio, nothing too glamorous. And I knew that he wanted more for me and I wanted more for me. So as we made decisions of whether or not, I was going to go to, the skating rink to go hang out with friends, or if I was going to go stay the night the day before a game the next day, it always came back to that same question of, is this the right decision for you to put yourself in a better place to get a good college degree? I made that decision over and over myself that I wanted that. If I ever said I didn't want it, if I ever said I wanted to go to the military or not go to college at all, that was always an option for me. But I made that commitment to him, and he ultimately made that commitment to me that he was going to make sure that every time I had an opportunity to put myself in a better position, I would. So for most, when they get to, playing sports at the highest level, they see, money, they see bags, they see, fame, they see fortune, they see change, they see women, they see, all the cool things that they saw around them. For me, I got to Notre Dame, and the only thing that I cared about was trying to network with the guys in my dorm that knew so much more about life than I thought I did at the time. They knew more about, what real wealth looked like. They knew more about what real business looked like. I come from a place where the richest people in the area are the service providers who are at the highest level. So doctors, lawyers, maybe there's a financial advisor or two who makes a little bit of money where I'm from. There was no innovators. There's no people who were truly, changing the world in some crazy way. So the biggest ceiling that I saw up until I got to college was one that was, the guys who could afford, the local country club because of their, salary that they had from the local hospital. So when I got there with that perspective, I started dreaming bigger. I started seeing that there was so much more that I didn't understand, and ultimately, took my dream and as I first accomplished the first one of going to a top university and trying to get a good degree, I was then able to kind of shape a new dream that still wasn't one that was all about making it to the pros and making a whole bunch of money, but rather one that was more about creating experiences and, unique perspectives that could allow me to beat the guys who were across the hall from me who wanted to be finance, investment bankers or private equity guys. And I was now trying to go compete with those guys versus competing with, the average athletes that the normal, collegiate player would think of.
You talk about coming from a working class family. It almost seems like you had pressure to not only succeed for yourself, but also succeed for your family. How did you manage that?
Yeah, it was, I got great parents. They are loving. They were tough. They knew I was special. They knew I had all the gifts to be a lot more than I was. And because of that, they pushed me. They pushed me harder than the average kid. I think that most people who make it to the top level can, relate to that in order to be that top 1%, you typically come from an environment that requires you to think about that top 1% all the time. And that's exactly what they were. They knew they wanted more from me. They knew they thought that I could go do things that were special. So as I continued to make those decisions to, prioritize getting a college degree and playing, sports at a good university, they rewarded me with, the nice car in the driveway. I remember getting my first car. It was a 2002 Cadillac STS. I called her Rosie. She was red. She drove like a boat. It was beautiful. And I drove her for about 2 months before I started to take my dad's brand new lease Dodge Ram and turn that into my car while he got to drive Rosie. It was those sacrifices that they showed me that if you go out and you continue to make those decisions that ultimately will, better our outlook as a family, that he was going to, sacrifice anything and everything he had to make sure that I got to the highest level. So while there was a lot of pressure, and there was environment that expected, excellence, I still, to this day, look back and think that I wouldn't have it any other way. And I hope that I one day could, have my own children in an environment that I was in so that they can, see some of the things that I got to see, pretty early on in my life.
Have you heard about this experiment that these people did with mice and cheese and cats in the spring?
I haven't heard. Tell me.
It's very vague, but I think when I explain it, it'll make sense. So they basically had these mice and they tied them to a spring so that they could measure the force by which the mice were pulling. And what they did was they basically placed a block of cheese in front of the mice, and then they would measure how hard the mice would pull. And, they pulled to some force because they obviously wanted the cheese. The next thing the experimenters did was they got basically like a fake cat, and then, sprayed like the smell of a cat on this cat and placed it behind the mice, and still had the block of cheese in front of the mice. And then they went to measure how hard the mice were pulling. And the mice were pulling exponentially harder, because not only were they running towards this block of cheese that they wanted, but they're also running away from this big cat that, in their minds, like, it's going to kill them. And I think I heard Alex Hormozi, if you're familiar with him, he kind of used this experiment to describe how, as humans, we often have things that we want. You mentioned NFL players. They want the money, the fame, the fortune, the women. So that's kind of what's pulling them towards perhaps a career in football. But then potentially even more, a lot of, NFL players, or really anyone who wants success, has things that they kind of run away from and that drive fear in them. And a lot of times it's those things that actually push us a lot harder than the things that we want. So all of that to say, in your experience, what was that thing that perhaps what was your cat? What were you running away from?
Yeah, that's a great story. I think that the main thing that I was running from was that it was known in Toledo. You can talk to anyone who's had any success or anyone who's still there. It's known that that place is a magnet, and it's a magnet full of jealousy. A magnet that's all about trying to like pull people down. Everyone kind of has that, that probably that feeling with their city where, there's so much rivalry between the high schools that everyone wants to call the next guy overrated. Everyone wants to tell you that, you're never going to make it, and that, all the hype that you're getting isn't worth it. And for me, I knew that if I was going to make it out, that, going to play pro ball would be one way to get to show them that, I was, at the highest level, and that I was going to, separate myself from being the average Toledo cat. But I also, once again, had the main thing I wanted to do was prove that, where I felt the most comfortable, which was, talking to my private high schools, friends' dads, talking to, the executives in the area, the people who are donating to my high school. Those are the people that I wanted to show that, like, okay, I can do what you do, and I can do that better. I'm not just some trophy toy that makes my high school look good because I'm a guy on an inner city school scholarship to go to a private school. I'm going to be a guy who can come back and hopefully be smarter than you at what you do. So what I was running away from was that magnet that was pulling me back to the nonsense of trying to belittle the next person and prove that you're cooler than the next person, that you can out joke the next person or out dress the next person. Like, that's the stuff that made you cool where I came from. And I was never cool. I was never the guy who dressed the best. I was never the guy who can talk the most smack. I couldn't, I wasn't the best rap guy when we were trying to rap battle. I could hoop. I could play, I could play sports pretty well, but for the most part off the field, the last thing I was cool. I wore a shirt and tie to school every day in 7th and 8th grade. I was the, student body vice president in 8th grade. That was the guy that I was. So the way that I was trying to, what I was trying to run from was the once again, the pull back to being what Toledo thought was cool versus what I thought was cool.
So fast forward, you commit to Notre Dame June 11th, 2013. And up until that point, at least from what I'm gathering from your story, it seems like football was a way to get into a good college, get a good degree, and ultimately fulfill this dream of yours to become successful, to potentially become an entrepreneur, start your own business, basically gather wealth in that manner versus, maybe going to the NFL. When you committed to Notre Dame, what was your thought process behind choosing Notre Dame, and how did you think those years of college were going to go for you?
Yeah, there's a couple of main factors that I remember very vividly in that decision. One was, I was looking at, in the beginning, I was looking at North Carolina and Michigan State and Northwestern, but Michigan State and North Carolina, I was going to make a decision between those two. that, North Carolina had one of my favorite coaches that I ever had a conversation with, and Blake Anderson, who was their quarterback coach at the time, has gone on to be a head coach at a bunch of big time schools now. And then I love Mark Antonio up in Michigan State. So I was making a decision between those two. The thing that separated those two is that Chapel Hill was going to be a much better university. So that felt like I was going to fulfill more of what I wanted to do. The problem that I couldn't get over was that, like, I was used to being, the star of the big sport in my high school. And it was tough for me to think that I was going to go to North Carolina where, you're going to get more love for basketball than you were for football. I wasn't going to a football school. I remember they have a track around their football stadium. It's like, you telling me that you can't at least just have a football stadium that's just for football, that just shows you that it's more about, maybe some other sports. So that was the only thing that was pulling me back. So after giving a call to Notre Dame and realizing that at the time, the starting quarterback is going to be suspended for that next season, they were going to actually take a quarterback in my class if they said they weren't. The main parts of the decision were, one, I was going to go to a school that was a football school where I was actually going to, have the opportunity to be, the quarterback of the top school. That's how you build your brand. That's how you can turn business into something that was bigger. Two, I was going to go to a university where everyone around me, while I didn't know anything about it, I'm not, an Irish Catholic kid that, grew up watching Rudy. While everyone around me kept telling me that, hey, this network is just way bigger than any other place. It was everyone. If it wasn't your first favorite, team to root for in Toledo, it was most people's second favorite team to root for. So I knew that, the network was going to be big for the business side of things and the life outside of the field. The third thing that really helped was that my best friend in high school, who I was playing, just got done with baseball season with, and he was a captain on the football team with me that next season. My buddy Ryan was the biggest Notre Dame fan. So I grew up with him just always in my ear about Notre Dame. So after, trying to make a decision between Michigan State and North Carolina, and Notre Dame separated itself, pretty substantially as all right, that's going to be a big time school. Now, the last thing I'll give you is that Alabama and LSU were on the list then. After Notre Dame offered, then those two came in and offered. And it was the last, week that I needed to make a decision in. I was late in the process. Most people had already committed. These were the only schools that didn't have a committed quarterback. Hell, both of them actually did end up committing a quarterback within a week around when I was getting ready to make a decision. And the last final straw was that it was going to cost us about $1,200 for my entire family to go down to fly down to Baton Rouge and then drive over to Tuscaloosa. And I just kept thinking to myself, it's like, am I really going to put my family in that position? Would they have to spend $1,000 to come see a game for me to come play? While hopping in the car to drive, 2.5 hours, west down 80-90 to get to Notre Dame. That was such an easy trip. I got there. It felt so special. And then all of a sudden, watching Rudy on the way home, you start to get the God country effect, and it became a no-brainer. There was no doubt in my mind that I was going to be a Fighting Irish.
So you go to Notre Dame, but I'm curious, what was, even as you're on Notre Dame and you're playing, how did you view, what was your relationship with football then? Did it change at all since high school?
It did. I wanted to be great. Now that I'm here and I'm realizing that I have a real opportunity to be a guy here, and that there's other guys getting recruited behind me, and I'm hearing the whispers of the next big time recruit who's getting ready to come in, it's time for me to ball. While the goal wasn't to, maybe I didn't have my eyes set on being, a top NFL prospect or trying to make it to the league. I still, expect greatness. There's still a household where we win as Kizer. So I wanted to make sure that I was, putting my best foot forward. And with that, had a tough freshman year, redshirt year. As hard as I was trying, as much weight as I was putting on, as much as I was, trying to use my, natural smarts to get ahead on the playbook, it was just a different world for me. I didn't grow up in Florida or California where you throw the ball, 50 times a game, or Arizona where these guys are literally throwing it 70 times a game. I grew up I grew up playing football. We ran at Rock. We threw the ball 13 times a game my junior year and won a state championship. We threw the ball maybe 16, 17 times a game when I was a guy my senior year. And even if, there was a pass call, I was the first one to check run, because I knew that we had the best offensive line and we were going to run this thing right down your throat. So getting to Notre Dame and starting to see what the big picture looked like, where you actually got to make a comeback throw to the outside, from the far hash and put that on time, unless a corner's going to come and pick that off and go pick six on you. I really, was a different game that I had to try to like dive into, and I sucked. I couldn't figure it out. I was trying to, be a ball guy. I was trying to figure out how to, find my way onto the field, and ultimately got to the end of my freshman year and realized that I don't have a chance of playing here. There's this 5-star recruit who's coming in behind me, Brandon Wimbush. I got Malik Zaire in front of me, who just finished my freshman year, winning the Music City Bowl as a starting quarterback, coming in to play in that game as the MVP of the Music City Bowl. I don't have a chance to play. So my mindset at that point was like, all right, be a good teammate, keep being a leader, help the young guys, who are coming in, but ultimately, be a good signaler on the sideline and maybe consider playing another sport. I was thinking about playing baseball. I started throwing a couple bullpens and, swinging the bat a little bit. Torrey Hunter Jr. at the time was making a switch over to playing both sports. So I was trying to get in the bullpen with him, the bat cage with him. And then on the last day of school, right before we left for summer break, Everett Golston announced that he was transferring to FSU. And I literally had to do a double take and think to myself, holy crap, there's only 2 quarterbacks on scholarship on the roster currently. Now, Brandon was coming in that summer, but there's only me and Malik. Like, you got to give it one last shot to see if you can figure it out. And that summer became the summer where I actually started to like figure out who I actually was as a quarterback. I actually spent a lot of time, outside the actual practice facility, making throws to some of my teammates that were out there. I started getting my groove back, started throwing the ball a lot longer because I had put on so much weight my freshman year. And that's when I started to like really start building my confidence, saying, you know what, if my number does get called, I can actually go do this.
So then you have honestly a really good 2016-2017 season at Notre Dame. And I pulled up a quote that you said, I believe this was prior to you getting drafted. This was kind of during the draft process. But you said, the experiences that I've gone through these past couple of years are also what separates me in this class. I think I know what it takes to win. I know what it takes to endure adversity. I've hit my low. It's only up from here. So you talk about that 2015 season being pretty tough, but I'm curious what other adversity you kind of had to fight through, and then kind of just some of the tactics that you've used to fight through adversity. Because I think a lot of people want to say that they fight through adversity, but a lot of people don't truly understand what it means to fight through adversity. I think, they probably think they're going through tough times, but in comparison, it might not be as tough as maybe, someone else is going through. But then also I think people just, especially in today's day and age, kind of just shy away from any sort of challenge. And I'm always so curious for people who have, competed at the highest level, how they've been able to overcome certain challenges and obstacles in their life. So curious, just adversity that you've gone through at Notre Dame, and then kind of how you fought through that.
Yeah, my career at Notre Dame is interesting now, like hearing people regurgitate it back to me now that I've kind of, I've been out of the league for a while, and, it's no longer, hoping for me to go be a, Super Bowl champion and make it all make sense. You look back on that career and you have 2 completely different seasons in the 2 years I was there. You have one season in which, we go to the Fiesta Bowl. We're one, really a missed field goal away from being, in the first ever Final Four that season, and things go in our direction. We end up losing to Stanford in the last game of the season, end up in the Fiesta Bowl against a great Ohio State team. And then you go to another season and you go 4-8. You don't even make a bowl game in the last year that I'm there, and I'm supposed to be this top recruit. So that was a roller coaster ride of its own. I think that as I reflect back on that, the things that I vividly remember is that when I was in high school, and for any people who are out there who, have had early success in their career, who consider themselves, a young phenom or whatever you want to call yourself as a top, maybe grade school or high school player, I knew that it was a very simple equation. And I was a quarterback. I was I played center field, and, I played point guard. So it was pretty simple. If I worked harder and I've got shots up this week, we were better. We won. And if I didn't get shots up and I was kind of lazy on defense and wasn't in good shape and wasn't eating well, it was a chance that we were going to lose the game because I wasn't, playing at my best. So it was a direct correlation of how good we did as a team, in correlation to, how I trained as a player. The thing that got me was that I got to, that higher level and realized that there's so many other factors than just me working hard. I freaking grinded. I tried my hardest my freshman year to put on weight, to, throw the ball, in every sort of way that my coach could ever ask me to throw the ball, to dive as deep into the playbook as I possibly could, to try to be the best teammate I could be and understand the playbook. Yet there wasn't any results on the other side. There was still, out of 5 reps in the spring ball scrimmage, I think I had one interception and I had a safety in which I went out of bounds on my own, without even being able to get tackled. So like, I'm working my butt off, yet the results aren't there. So you start to realize that there's so many other aspects that you have to take into account when you're searching for greatness, when you're searching for success. You got to take into account, your mental health. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but you got to take into account, the other things that allow you to release so that when you get out there and you go into flow state, you can actually get into flow state. At the time, I didn't know what flow state was. And once again, it was on or it was off, and it was on and at 110% or it was on at 100%. There was no, get out there and play and trust that the preparation that you did up until that point was going to, get you to the finish line. What I had to realize, and really not even until my second year in the NFL, was that me as a person, I'm best when off the field. I have challenges that take me in different mental directions that aren't just ball, where I have, an opportunity to whether it's, talk through, quantum physics with my best friend, Pat, whether it was, doing charitable things on the off day with university hospitals in Cleveland, whether it was, thinking about, starting businesses or investing capital. Those were the things that as I did that off the field, it allowed me to come back onto the field and lock back in and play at my highest level. And ultimately, that's who I was as a quote unquote phenom in high school. It just wasn't by choice. It was what you were supposed to do. You were commended for, being an all around person when you're in high school. You got to college, you're not commended as much unless you're winning football games. You get to the NFL. Now you don't have anything to do other than try to get the Browns out of this hole. So that's where I realized that, rather than leaning in and trying to just surround yourself and be in the tightest bubble you can possibly be to be great at ball. Actually, the best thing for me was to start to consider things off the field, to challenge me mentally, so that by the time I got back on the field, I felt like I can, truly play in that flow state that allows me to not overthink and just play.
Do you think that you maybe lost yourself a bit going, through college and then even your first year with the NFL? And I say that because I think I read you. So obviously, first year with the Browns didn't work out. You go to Green Bay, you're with Aaron Rodgers. And you said that one of the things that you learned from Rodgers was that, Rodgers had this ability to be more than just a football player outside of football. Like he had other interests. He was interested in business and all this stuff. We obviously make fun of his conspiracy theory stuff, but it's something that he likes to research and stay informed about. I think he's getting more into politics. So like you see the side of Rodgers, like we all know Aaron Rodgers, arguably greatest thrower, natural thrower of the football the NFL has ever seen. And then you see, outside of football Rodgers, where it's like, was 9/11 real? And you're like, wait, hold on. But that's one of the things that you said that you learned from him was this ability for him to express himself, that he was more than just football. So did you have this pressure to only be a football player in Notre Dame and then with the Browns, and then along the way kind of lost who you were and didn't have those escapes that you just mentioned kind of outside of football?
Notre Dame, not as much. At Notre Dame, I still had, the academic side of things where there was time that was allotted that coaches had to respect, that, ADs and whoever was around the football team had to respect, that I had to be able to get out of the facility and go think about things that weren't that. So it was easy for me to still find outlets while I was still playing at Notre Dame. But yeah, once I got to Cleveland, everything you said is absolutely true. I just got as narrow as I can possibly get. I came out, had an unbelievable training camp, had an unbelievable, I think they called it the orange and brown scrimmage, was balling. And then I get out to game one and have a pretty good game one against the Steelers at home. It was my first ever rivalry game playing against Big Ben and Antonio Brown, and like really feeling like I was that guy. Like I was really getting ready to come into, this chapter of my life. And then you come back and you lose again, and you lose again, and you lose again. And once again, I think that my biggest regret in the NFL was that as we lost, my bubble got smaller. I got more narrow-minded. I started going into the facility at 4:45 in the morning to, make every throw for that practice starting at 5 a.m. I get done with that at 6 o'clock. I go in and do some film, take a quick nap. Team meeting started at 7:30. And I'd be at the facility until 7 p.m. that night. And I just thought that the more that I thought about ball, the more that I thought about the playbook and making every throw, the better I was going to be. And what I've now realized with me, and I'm not like everyone else. This is just my experience myself, is that when I was at my best, I think about the things that I was doing off the field at my best. I think about my that 2016 season that we went to the Fiesta Bowl. Pat, my best friend and co-founder of my business now, we started a essential oils-based products company on the side. We're thinking about social entrepreneurship on the side. It was those things that allowed me to like be free off the field and then come in and be in a flow state on the field. And in Cleveland, it's the exact opposite. I was probably the furthest thing from myself. I built I remember there was a lot of firsts in my life then, and one of those was the first time I actually felt real tension with my parents. Like I had so much respect for my dad. I would never disrespect my dad, and hope I didn't at the time. And I would never disrespect my mom, but I was so frustrated after a game that I kind of lit back. And my dad had to like grab my mom and walk away and say, we're not going to be around you if you're going to be talking like this. And like that, it's those moments that like I have never had before then, have never had since I've been out of the league, that just shows you that I was not myself at that time.
You keep mentioning flow state, and I first heard the term actually when I was listening to a Steph Curry interview with JJ Redick back when JJ was a podcaster, not a head coach of the Lakers. But Curry talked about this idea of flow state and how when he's on the court, a lot of times he doesn't really even have to think about what he's going to do next. It just comes naturally to him. And I thought that was fascinating. So then I did more research on flow state and kind of how it, the origins of it, the science behind it. And I landed on someone named Dr. Jim Lair, who actually was our most recent guest on the podcast. But Jim has done a lot of work with tennis players. He actually was one of the first people to coin the term mental toughness back in like the late 70s, when people didn't really understand what mental toughness was. But obviously in tennis, it's especially important. It's a solo sport. You're out there by yourself. Tennis is a very tough game mentally because you go through so many ups and downs. And so he started talking about mental toughness and flow state and all of these things. I thought it was fascinating. From your experience, flow state, what are you going through when you're in this flow state?
Yeah, for me, once again, everyone gets their flow state differently. Everyone, has different triggers. I'm sure, and I'm excited to go back and listen to your last pod with him. I didn't catch that one to hear about it. My first experience I had with flow state was actually with a guy by the name of Dr. Michael Gervais, who was at the Elite 11 camp. And that was, once again, at the time, I was a sophomore in high school going to my junior year. And that was, access that I've never seen before, and information I never had before. And he kind of broke it down to me. And, when I think about it now, when I, after having some experience with it, is that, the way sports are built, and quite frankly, what I've learned is the way that life is, and whatever you do as your main thing, whatever you're passionate about or how you spend your time, it's about, training like a lion. I think, Naval, Ravikant mentions this, is that, we're built as humans to, rest, assess, go out and train, perform, and then repeat the process. I might have butchered that a little bit, but in that, the idea is that you have a structure around sports that allows for you to, focus in on training, in which, you push your body to every limit you can possibly push it to. Then from there, you go into a bit of a preseason typically, where you then get to take all of that training and then, kind of relax a little bit. I remember in preseason, you finally get out of that training camp mode and you start to see who you actually are, with the goal that during the season, by the time you get out on that field and the lights are on and the live bullets are flying, that you can just play, that you're not thinking about anything else, that you're not in a zone where you have to, be very intentional in every move, but it just happens. You got to trust that everything you've done up into that moment will get you through that. So for me, and specifically within, football and me playing, I felt flow state when the game, was outside of me. And what that I mean is that my best flow state is when I got to the line of scrimmage and I remembered that when they're in the shade, and, the safety's down, that they're probably going to rotate the other way, and that I should probably get my back over to the right side, although the slide is to the right, because there's probably going to be either corner pressure or some sort of a safety pressure off the side. And if I keep that guy out of my lap, I'm going to go throw the seam ball like it's no other in the fire zone or place on the other side of the field. When my mind was there, that's when the ball came out easy. That's when my mechanics are perfect. That's when, there's a little extra zip on the ball. When my mind got to the line of scrimmage and I'm up there and I start thinking about, whether or not my fingers are dry or wet, and whether or not, the last throw that I made, am I going to be able to make that throw again? Or I just got done putting one a little high into the outside. I better make a correction and keep my weight, maybe not, lock out my front leg or those types of thoughts. That's when I'm not, trusting in my preparation. That's when I'm not trusting in the process of the entire, off season to get me to that moment. And rather I'm questioning whether or not I have the ability to go do what I need to do. So I think that, in different sports, there's different things. Basketball is a little more of an art. It's a little more, fluid. Therefore, flow state probably comes a little easier to just, trust where you're at on the field. But as a quarterback, once again, what I realized in backing up Aaron is that, when you are truly an intellectual, when you are truly a strategist and you're out there playing chess, the guys who are typically winning games, the Pat Mahomes, the Tom Brady's, the Aaron Rodgers, those guys, if you can get a little glimpse at their mind, which I got to be as a backup quarterback, when they come off of that play and you ask them what they saw, they start telling you everything but themselves. They don't talk about their wrist. They don't talk about how the ball came out of their hand. They start talking about everything else around them. That's when I think, quarterbacks are in the most flow state. I think the same thing is probably with receivers, where I know Devontae Adams is thinking about the safety in one high, so that when he catches a ball that comes across the middle, he feels like he can break out of the backside. He's not thinking about his hands. He's not thinking about his route. He's not thinking about his feet. He's just thinking about something else that's outside of his body. That's when I think that I've seen players access that flow state more times than not.
I think that example of a lion is fantastic. I think I've heard Naval say that too. It's like, a lion spends most of his time stalking his prey. And then in the instance that he actually goes to hunt, it's like a split second decision and it's a split second action. Now, obviously, I think hunting for lions is kind of what you went through when you were playing a football game. Obviously, a football game is more than a couple seconds, but all of that to say, the amount of preparation and training that you did in the off season, like you just alluded to, that is, exponentially larger than what a football game is. And the amount of throws that you have to make in the off season is exponentially larger than the amount of throws that you have to make during a game. So that's fascinating, to hear, because I think as fans, like we almost have this viewpoint, especially when it comes to quarterbacks, where it's like, at least for me, I can speak for myself, I view it as like very black and white. It's like, I'm a fan of the Niners, so obviously a big Purdy fan, but sometimes I'll be watching Purdy and I'll be like, dude, why did he make that throw? Or like, man, he just doesn't have it today. But like, we forget all of the inputs that they have to process and go through to be able to play at a high level. Like we dumb it down is, I think, probably the perfect way to describe it. And it's a good reminder just how difficult it is to play that position.
Yeah. And every team is different. Every scenario is different. Every coach is different. Every system that you're in is different. Like, the one thing that I reflect on a bunch now when I watch, it took me a couple years to like really dive back in, but now I'm diving back in a little bit, is really the nuances of quarterback play within offensive systems, where, the beauty, there's no knock at all to anyone in this tree. There's some great quarterbacks who are playing this tree, but the Shanahan tree that came out of, Washington and now has spread like wildfire all over the NFL with, McVay and Callahan, and there's a lot of people who are running this offense now, is one in which the quarterback doesn't have to go out there and point out a mic and sit under center and see where rotation's going and audible to one of 12 plays that are sitting there available for the specific play. That was what the West Coast offense used to be. Where, I got a lot of a glimpse of that. I got to do that with Hugh Jackson. I got to do that with, John Gruden. I got to do that with Mike McCarthy, where, there was plenty of times in all three of those teams. Well, I guess with me as a rookie, not as much with the Browns, but more with Green Bay and with, watching Derek Carr in Oakland, where we would literally just say, hey, we're in trips right, go. And we knew that, if we're in trips right and they're in single high, it's this play, audible to this play. If they're in two high, audible to that play. If there's, an uneven box, get to a run. Those are all the things that you're thinking about as a quarterback to go out there and play. The Shanahan tree is one that requires you to play fast. It's more about misdirection. It's more about building on top of the last series that you had or on top of the last quarter. So from a quarterback perspective, you have much more of an opportunity to play free. So in that scenario, from a guy who I like, as you could probably tell, I like the intellectual challenge of like trying to get my mind on things that aren't on ball. Now, I get into the Shanahan tree and start playing with Matt LaFleur or going and playing with Art Smith in Tennessee. And now I'm looking for the challenge. Where's the mental challenge? Where's the audible? Where can I go out there and show that I know more than just whether or not the safety on the right's coming down or not. And what you see with someone like Purdy and guys like, Kurt is that, in my opinion, where what I lacked then is when you have that little extra, mental capacity when you play in a system that's a little more, narrow, where you see greatness is the thing that they do off the field, within the huddle, on the sideline, within the media. They just become great leaders. And that's one thing that I didn't have the confidence to go out and do. I was so focused on saving my career when I was playing in those environments that I wasn't, hitting flow state the right way because I was thinking about everything, that I needed to do from my footwork to be able to get this ball, off of a play action and on a strike route. Those guys, what they got to do with their little extra mental capacity was, become great leaders, be the glue to some unbelievable talent in the systems that they're in. I think Jordan Love has, a lot of upside, with Coach LaFleur, leading the way. Coach LaFleur is going to continue to put him in great positions to grow great balls. But what I'm most excited about is because he has, an offensive coordinator who has had so much success like LaFleur has had in his early careers as his head coach. Jordan gets to go out there and now be, a guy who has no worry in the world when it comes to whether or not he's going to keep his job, and he gets to focus on building relationships with every guy who's around him, and hopefully, just continue to be a great teammate. And that's where he gets to, that's where he gets to spend his time now. That's where he gets to spend that extra mental capacity, so that flow state continues to come back to him.
How important is that first team that you get drafted to and that first experience? Because I would argue if DeShone Kizer had gotten drafted to the Niners with Shanahan or the Packers with LaFleur, or name a team in a good spot with a good coach with some weapons, I think your career could have gone a little bit differently. What's your opinion on that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to say woulda, coulda, shoulda. Everyone has their story. I know there was 3 or 4 quarterbacks that were drafted after me that ended up in situations that have them still playing today. They ended up as a third string guy who got paid a little bit of money to not make a ruckus on the team and be a good teammate. And then over time they got their opportunities and they're still playing right now. So yeah, that would have been great. To have an opportunity to learn from the right people and to maybe identify yourself as a long-term guy, a guy who can be maybe a good backup and maybe start 4 or 5 years from now. But, I dug myself into a hole, and it was my own hole that I dug myself into. You mentioned the comments that I made in pre-draft about, all the experiences that I had that I can go out and win today, and that, I could, be the body of Cam Newton with the brains of Tom Brady. Like I wanted to go win right now. And I got that opportunity with the Browns. I got the chance to go win right now. And what I realized very quickly is that there's a lot of moving parts to being great. There's timing within, how your team is spending money with talent around you. There's your relationship with your offensive coordinator and the trust that you might have to be able to go out there and play free. There's, injuries that happen. There's, ownership and management that gets involved, with teams, especially rebuilding teams where they want to have their hands in on things. And those all become, typically things that pull, young guys away from what really matters. And that's just going out there and trying to win ball games. There was probably way too many conversations that I had my rookie year with, ownership and management and player personnel guys that I should have just been out there focusing on, playing ball. And once again, if I was drafted maybe a pick higher or a pick later, I might have been in the position that would allow me to learn about what being a pro was versus, within, the first couple games of the season, there was nothing you can tell me in the quarterback room from any guy. Like I got a lot of respect from Cody Kessler and we had Kevin Hogan at the time. I got a lot of respect, a lot of love for those guys. Those are still great friends of mine now. But quite frankly, by week 2 or 3, why was I going to listen to them? You haven't had success. Like I feel like I know more than you. I'm the one who beat you out to be the starting quarterback. That's how naive I was as a 21-year-old guy who just got handed a couple $1 million and was walking around his home state as a hometown hero. But looking back on it, if you could tell me I could choose which team I would have ended up on, yeah, I would have loved to have gone to the Giants in the 3rd round and sat behind a couple quarterbacks and then got my shot 2 years later once I knew what being a pro was. Going to another team. But, every situation is different. I had plenty of opportunity to go and be the hometown hero. And I dropped the ball and didn't really, have the season I wanted. Hell, I didn't have one win to at least hang my hat on something there.
Yeah. I don't want to bring up the stat, but you brought it up.
It's on me. And I love it. Like it's a part of me. It's my brand now. I was 0-16. There's only 2 of us, me and Dan. And I like to think that, I'm going to fail forward. I'm going to take every lesson that I learned in that building and apply it to really business. Now that I can speak freely and be who I actually am fully all the time now, a couple years out of the league, the best thing that the Browns offered to me was an opportunity to see the ins and outs of an organization, of a multi-billion-dollar organization, and how communication happened throughout that year. How, media was handled throughout that year, how, hierarchies of management was handled throughout that year. I was a 21-year-old starting quarterback who got to sit in on senior council meetings, who got to, get dinners with GMs and, have private meetings with head coaches and owners. And ultimately, what I got a glimpse into, at least at that time of the Browns, was, the dysfunction that ended up in 0-16 with 2 guys who are no longer, with the organization. We had Sashi Brown, who was going down one path and had one mindset. We had Hugh Jackson going down another path. And we had, an ownership group who's looking to freaking win. I didn't care what path to go down, but just give me a path that won games. So all of that pressure ended up on me as a starting quarterback. And, I was the only one who was required every Wednesday to come back in the media and deal with the questions about all that other stuff that was on top of me. So as I reflect on that, I just know, what worked and more importantly in that season, what didn't work that I want to try to apply to my business now.
I want us to take a step back and go to your draft, because I think that part of your journey is very interesting. And before we get into, how it felt to be drafted and maybe all those cliche questions, I want to bring up your own quarterback rankings for that draft class for that year. So your rankings were as follows. You had Watson 1, you at 2, Trubisky at 3, and then this random guy that I'm sure none of us have heard of, Patrick Mahomes at 4. I've asked I've had other people on the podcast, and I always find it interesting to ask them, why is it so hard to evaluate quarterbacks? It's the one position that it seems like GMs and just we, as humans, we cannot get right. There's the bust rate in the first round is insane. If you go back and look through, a lot of the data from your perspective, obviously being a quarterback and seeing what you've seen. I mean, obviously you had Mahomes last. Why is it so hard to evaluate, these quarterbacks coming out of college?
He played in the Big 12. I played against CW in the ACC, on the college game day evening. We didn't see that coming. Nobody saw that coming. No one but Andy Reid knew exactly what Pat could become. We knew he was a gunslinger. I remember the game of him. I think he had some ridiculous yards. I'm gonna butcher it, but over 500, maybe 700 yards in one game on 70-some passes with a bunch of overtimes. We all knew he was a gunslinger, but I still at the time thought that being an NFL quarterback required you to have that West Coast terminology, the ability to get under center and point things out. And I knew that at the time we didn't see, that happening out of the Big 12. We just saw a run and gun ball with no defense. So it was, easy at the time to think that, the other 3 guys who were playing in more traditional, conferences, if you notice, I pointed to 3 guys who played, us pretty much in the ACC and 2 other guys in the ACC. I went to the guys I knew who were playing in, at the time, one of the toughest conferences and winning games, before I went to Pat. But ultimately, we all had respect. We knew that Pat threw the ball 80-some yards in the air. We knew he was going to be a gunslinger. I just thought we were in the best class of all time. I really thought that it was, it was going to be a magical class. I've been around DW since 14 years of age, and noticed that he was, doing things that I couldn't even imagine with running the football and throwing the football. And, as accurate as could be, was swaggy as could be, had so much confidence. So I thought he was going to be, the guy that he's, quite frankly, has continued to be in the league. Mitch, had a lot of respect for him, knowing that he was, obviously playing at a school that I thought I was going to go to under a coach that I thought was a pretty special man in Blake Anderson. So I figured that he was going to have a pretty good career. Probably, obviously if I could go back and draft it over again, Pat Mahomes has become what he's become. But, ultimately I think that, that was just me, probably being a little partial to the people that I was around more than not. And that was, DW, as well as, Mr. Trubisky, who grew up in Cleveland and went to the school that I thought I might be going to.
I asked Josh Dobbs when he was on the podcast what separates great quarterbacks from average quarterbacks in the NFL. And I thought his answer was interesting. He said consistency and the ability to make, essentially make average throws consistently. And he said, if you look at a lot of the best quarterbacks in the league, they can hit, the hitch routes with consistently. They hit the slants right where they need to be. It's a lot of the throws that you wouldn't say are, extremely spectacular, but they're just able to do it at a consistent level. What's your response to that?
Yeah, that's the only answer, the perfect answer and the only answer. So if I were to build on top of that, yeah, you got to be able to take what's in front of you. The other thing that great quarterbacks do is they show up in big moments. They get better, they tighten up as the game, gets on the line. And I think that what we've seen is a clear separation between, the top few quarterbacks who've been around for a long time, winning games, with a couple other guys who've entered themselves in the conversation with, with Pat joining in that. And it seems like those guys, when the lights are shining the brightest and it's the biggest game, is when you see, the most spectacular plays come out of there. So it's a mix of, taking what's given. Check downs are some of the biggest plays in football, and they hit those guys right in stride where they don't even have to think about catching the ball. They can just take off and run. They do that effortlessly. How many times have we seen Pat Mahomes, off of a bad platform, drop his elbow somewhere around his hip and throw a check down that still hits the running back, right perfectly in stride. It's those extra 4 or 5 yards and those plays that actually separate you to get you to, third and manageable so you can throw the ball down the field. So once again, I'll second, Josh, and saying that is the main trait of greatness. But if I was going to add anything on top of that, it's also, once again, making, big plays when the biggest games are requiring you to do so.
It's kind of funny because I remember thinking when he said that, it's funny how most things in life require just consistency. Like I think a lot about it with business. Obviously, podcasting I'll throw in there as, part of kind of like the business sphere. But then you look at football and you look at other, things in life. It's like the best people are usually just consistent. And it's not always the most talented. It's not always even the hardest workers. It's just the people who consistently show up. And I just think it's so funny how it's kind of a full circle. You could really apply it to anything you do. And it's like, if you just follow, I don't know if you've seen, this is gonna be kind of off topic, but that, I forget what the meme is called, but it's like two guys on opposite sides of a graph. And then there's a guy in the middle, and the two guys on the opposite sides of the graph are just like, it's like the most basic advice. It's like, be consistent, for example. And then the guy in the middle who's at the top of the graph is like, oh, you have to, to what you were saying earlier, you have to plant your foot this way and you have to do this. It's like all these complicated things. And it comes back down to the guy who's just like, be consistent. And like, that's the only advice you need.
That's it. Showing up every day, doing the same thing, being the same person to your teammate, being the same person to your coach, and ultimately, having something that people can expect, and that's what made, all the great ones that I was around great. That's what made Joe Thomas as the left tackle great. There was nothing special about what he did. He might have, a better kick step than some other people, or maybe a little more athletic. But at the end of the day, we knew that when we broke that huddle and he was going to be on the left side of the line of scrimmage, that he was going to, do the same thing over and over again, get his hands on the player and make sure that they didn't get near the quarterback. And that consistency of him as a person is what, allowed him to be, one of the greatest left tackles of all time for me to play alongside. So yeah, I think that's all it comes down to. Like you said, it's there's no secret to that. It's, waking up and having discipline, having a bigger vision in mind, making sure that you're never, too far out ahead of yourself, but rather, maybe if you have a big dream, you have some solid goals, and that those goals are being attacked the same way every day.
Yeah. I want to take you to June 14th, 2017. You signed a 4-year, $4.94 million contract, $2.42 million guaranteed, signing bonus of $1.73 million. For the kid who put so much pressure on himself to not only succeed for you, but to also succeed for your parents and your family, what was that moment like when you signed that deal?
Special, man. That was special. I haven't heard those numbers in a long time. I haven't been thinking about it that way in a long time. Like at the time, I knew I wanted more. I knew I got hungry. I got a little taste of it. I got hungry, but there was definitely a sigh of relief to right as that money hit an account. Was able to go back and purchase my parents a place outside of town. At least help them purchase it outside of town on 7 acres and outside of the inner city that we grew up in. And that was kind of no matter what I think back on in my career, that's helping them, go to another level and start, gaining more experiences outside of just the average, Toledo family is the reason why I would never have anything other than love for the sport and love for the career that I had, was that I was able to do that. But quite frankly, at the time, as most people are, was probably not as grateful as I should have been, and was already thinking about the next $100 million contract that I can be going after. At that time, as the money actually hit my account and actually signed, I was looking up Cody Kessler and Brock Osweiler and thinking, hell, I can be the starting quarterback here and go have 2 decent seasons. I was thinking to myself, hell, you can't go down from one win. I'm going to go get at least 5 wins year 1 and then 8 wins year 2. And next thing you know, you're up for renegotiation for $100 million. So at the time, I thought that was going to be chump change for something that was going to become a lot more money later down the road. But looking back on it, yeah, it was pretty special to think that there was so much work that was put into that moment, so many late nights, so many early mornings, training with my pops that turned into a nice payday for us all. But now, looking back at it, I probably wish I was just a little more, present and realizing that, not a lot of people make it to that point and that not a lot of people ever make that type of money. And I should probably be doing something that's a little more, appreciative of the opportunity that I had versus, thinking about the next one.
Yeah. Where do you think most, I remember reading some crazy stats about, just like NFL players going bankrupt and all of these things. Where do you think most players go wrong when they sign such big deals in terms of their money management?
Yeah, it's interesting. It changed a little bit with the CBA that happened around COVID, where we moved to a 34-week play period. But at the time, and still, the main difference that I've realized kind of in the real world now versus in the NFL world is that you live this kind of like unbalanced lifestyle. You get handed so much money and these game checks that happen on a weekly basis that you feel like you're just in the unlimited green for a year. You're living in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Your only expense is maybe going to the movies or getting some Chipotle. So you just see green, 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 green. And you don't need to drive a nice car. You're stuck out there in the salt and in the snow. So you just drive the local truck dealer, free marketing car that you get. And you feel like you just have unlimited cash. So when you get off the field and you go, and do your LA off season or your, Arizona off season, you feel like you've earned the right to go spend in an egregious way. So that off the field lifestyle that you set for yourself of, going to Whole Foods and not blinking at buying, way too many extra ribeyes and having way too many, too many expensive, dinners when you go out and about, you kind of set that as your lifestyle so that, as you start to leave the game and those game checks don't show up at the back half of the year the way you used to, you start, setting habits that require you to, have $25,000, $30,000 months on a pretty consistent basis. I'm here to tell you that it's no secret that if you continue to spend $30,000 a month and you're not making a dime on top of that, that's going to run out pretty quickly. I think that's probably what happens. Most people think about the CapExes, the capital expenditures. They think about the big cars and the houses and all of that. Like that's definitely. That's easy to get away from, buying a chain. It's easy to realize that you're spending too much money. But I think that where people actually go broke is when they're not, even looking at their receipt as they go spend, $500 on a quick grocery run that's supposed to only last them a couple of days. So they go spend, $10,000 2 nights in a row out in Vegas because their friends are out and about. It's that type of lifestyle that actually starts to catch up to you, not the massive cars or the expensive, the massive houses or the expensive cars.
Yeah. DeShone, a couple more questions to kind of wrap up your NFL career. And then I want to end it with some business talk, because I know that's obviously a big part of what you're doing now. I have to ask because it's just staring at me. Playing with Rodgers, what that experience was like.
And then on the field, it was, 5 days a week of seeing the ball spin like a way that I never saw a ball spin before. It was the easiest flick of the wrist and the ball was flying out there. It was, laid back chess games, not, in your face checkers games like I was around. I was so tight coming out of Cleveland. I wanted to, do a good fake, get up and rip the ball out to a comeback route. And all of a sudden he got out there and it was more like art. It was more, using your eyes and to put defenders in different places. It was more, seeing little tells of where the nickel's standing and where his eyes are at. And then looking left before you throw right. It was, how do you get a flat route that's running, diagonally from, the line of scrimmage only 2 yards outside or 2 yards, to the sideline? How do you put the ball in a place where he can get the ball and turn upfield and have, more than just a catch tackle? Well, it's, being able to manipulate the flat defender to back up a little bit by looking up the field before you drop the ball down. That was a whole new world. That wasn't what we were talking about in Cleveland. I didn't have a mentor to kind of teach me that. In Cleveland, I was, the goal was to throw the ball to the right guy on time. And in Green Bay, it was to, think so much bigger than just getting the ball to the right guy in the right time. It was about the other, 22 or 20 guys that are on the field other than me and the guy that I'm throwing the ball to.
Do you think that, given the recent media coverage of Rodgers and everything he said, do you think that we've come to a point where people misunderstand him and don't really get who the real Rodgers is? Is that kind of the feel? Is there like a disconnect between the media's portrayal of him and who Aaron is as a person from your perspective?
I think that Hard Knocks was a great opportunity to see more of who he actually was. I think that probably helped him out quite a bit from maybe some of those articles that were mentioned in the past of questioning what type of teammate he was or what type of person he was. So I think that he has done a good job with just from a high level, showing a little bit behind that tall wall that you might build to people who are outside of the team he's on. But ultimately, a lot of the conversation around Aaron has nothing to do with Aaron. It has everything to do with, comparing him to other people that are out there, comparing him to Tom Brady, comparing him to, Joe Montana, comparing him to Dan Marino and trying to determine whether or not he's great. But, from the career that he has and who he is as a person, there's no knock on, making it as far as he's making it, being a Super Bowl MVP, bouncing out of Green Bay and going to a place that he feels like he can go win at, and he feels like the knowledge and the experience that he has from prior seasons has now put him in a better position to go out and actually win a Super Bowl versus fighting against maybe some of the management and decisions that were made around him. And there's no doubt in anyone's mind if you look back on that Green Bay roster as Devontae Adams ends up leaving. There's nobody else there. There was no one else there to think that there was going to be another receiver for him to get the ball to. I mean, that's an obvious, mistake that you would never see another team, do around another great quarterback. You try to get as many great weapons as you can around him. So he went to a place where he thought that he could win. So if you have a knock on his decision to leave, I don't have any bad things to say. If you have a knock on, how he's handled himself off the field, the guy is an opinionated, thoughtful person. Some people who are special like that, they gotta provoke some conversation. Otherwise, they're just sitting at home, keeping those thoughts to themselves. So I got nothing but great things to say about him.
As you look back on your own career, so obviously 1 year with the Browns, 1 year with the Packers, and then finished off with the Raiders and the Titans. Is there something that you wish people knew more about DeShone Kizer, the football player?
Nah, I honestly wish they knew less. I wish that I could just have gone out there and gone through, the young growing pains of being a young quarterback in the league to myself and around people who actually care about the longevity of my career versus being in everyone's, living room every freaking weekend with another loss and another tough question and a fired GM and a new receiving core and, required to answer questions that had nothing to do about, my play and what I was trying to get done. So if I could go back on it, I wish I would have just, been me. I would have stayed in my zone, not, tried to be what I thought was a celebrity starting quarterback and just focused on, maybe running the ball a little bit more, maybe, hanging out with my teammates a little more and not focused on, coming in too early, and building better relationships with the guys that I needed to have camaraderie with and timing with when I was out in the field. I was so focused in on, myself and how I looked on film and how I fit into the offense that I probably missed the opportunity of building some great relationships with some great guys who are out there on the field with me.
I spoke with Sean Clifford, who is the backup quarterback for the Packers currently, and I asked him about dealing with criticism and dealing with national attention. He famously had, a couple rough plays, a couple rough games with Penn State. And he talks about, going back to your room and basically being, sitting there on the bed, being there, by yourself. You just have your own thoughts to go through, and there's no one really there to tell you, hey, keep your chin up or whatever. It's just really a lonely battle a lot of the times. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And I think we as fans are so quick to say, especially with social media now, it's, Joe Schmo can go on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it now, and say, hey, DeShone, you suck. As a player, how do you deal with that? Like how much of an effect does that have on you?
Shouldn't have any. If you're really trying to play at the highest level, I'm just going to call a spade a spade. If you're trying to play at the highest level, that cannot bother you. You can't. Everyone likes to say, don't read it. Don't listen to the noise. The main thing is you got to be able to look it dead in his eyes and understand that it's empty. Understand that they weren't where you're at. They don't come from where you come from. They don't have the experiences that you have because it's not going anywhere. You can't hide from it. It doesn't just disappear once you make it to a certain level and you all of a sudden you're great. Even the great ones have to deal with criticism on a daily basis. Think about all of the ups and downs that someone as great as Tom Brady went through with the Deflategate and obviously a divorce. And there's always going to be someone there to try to pull you down. And I think that a common thread between anyone that I've been around who's had a lot of success is that they know it exists, but anytime you're around them, it's just not a part of what they're focused on. It comes back to, as you mentioned, with what it takes to be great, and that's consistency and discipline. If you have a structure to your week, and you know what you need to be thinking on Monday to get yourself ready, with training and physical therapy to get your body right, Tuesday off day, Wednesday, deep dive into first and second down, Thursday you get into third down and blitz, Friday you do a little bit of red zone and some end of game stuff. Saturday, you're back to, looking at the entire game plan for the entire week. Sunday, you go play. Monday, do it over again. There's no room for a comment to get you off of, where you're at mentally. There shouldn't be any room for you to be reading something and actually have an effect. But rather, I always saw it and take it from somebody who has had knives pulled out on them from losing games in Cleveland and had, death threats and all the above. That I always saw it as, the only reason why these people know who I am is because I probably did something right. That I saw it as more, motivation for me to continue to go down the path and continue to have a platform that I had. So, it may be a little, it may lack a little empathy to say, suck it up. But the reality is that like, there's no there's no surprise when that first message comes through. There's no surprise when that comment hits your Instagram. If you're actually going after greatness and you know that you want to go out there and have some big time success, you got to be able to look that dead in its eyes and see it as absolutely nothing but motivation for the next opportunity to go back out there and prove them wrong.
Well said, my man. As we move away from football and into some of your current ventures, I'm curious what your singular goal is outside of football. And I'll say this. So high school DeShone wanted to figure out a way to get to college. College DeShone wanted to figure out a way to change his family's life. NFL DeShone wanted to figure out a way to get better at football and win. What does present day DeShone want to do?
Present day DeShone is looking to put currently a bow on the last chapter that shows that the trajectory is still up and to the right. Leaving ball probably a little early. Still had a bunch of opportunities to go out there and continue to chase the dream. I knew that I wanted to do something bigger off the field than I did on the field, and I went after it. And for the last few years, I've been building. I've been going through what every entrepreneur knows, what it takes to actually build a big business and a good business. It's going to take 4 or 5 years before you actually see the success that you have. You still got to show up every day, have that consistency, have that discipline, put in the same amount of hours that you're putting in the sports, and hopefully there's something on the other side of that. I just think that there's an opportunity just over the next couple of years with all the learnings that I've had in business, hiring and firing, raising money, building products, selling to customers, making money, losing money. There's an opportunity on the other side of that to have some sort of, a milestone moment over hopefully the next year or two where, whether it's a big fund closed on, whether it's a big deal that we sell, whether it's selling the business one day, I'm just looking for that opportunity to take this message that I've been trying to share with everyone, which is one that says you don't have to, be all ball all the time, but you can be more than just an athlete, and you can do things off the field just as much as you are on the field. I'm looking for that opportunity to put an exclamation point on that with some sort of a big, successful milestone event in business that can show anybody from back home that, yes, sports are a way out. Yes, music is a way out. Those are the 1%, and you can be that 1% if you put your work in, but you also can be maybe the 5% or the 10% who finds success off the field and makes just as much money, longer term money that comes consistently over a long time, money that, you get respect from the banker with. You don't get, lump sums up front in which you can't buy a house because you don't have, a salary to actually support, the income that you have. Money that comes long, and that's the money that I've wanted all day long. I've never really wanted the short-term success or fame. I wanted the long-term wealth, and something that ends up with the next generation of my family, seeing something I don't even recognize currently today. So this DeShone right now is proving himself as a true business leader, not an athlete, business person, and ultimately, the goal is that my legacy that I'm trying to build really gets a big, milestone moment in the next, year or so that really shows that there's something that's probably bigger for me off the field than there ever was on the field.
I see that you're wearing the hat of your business. So for those who might not be aware, what is One of None, and what are you trying to accomplish with your company?
So One of None is we're a connected product platform. So it's tech. And essentially what we do is we help brands who launch physical products. We help them make their products smart by essentially taking a NFC tag. It's like a tappable authentication tag. Think of like the same tech that you use for Apple Pay. And we take NFC chips, we place them on physical products, and ultimately make that product more interactive for customers. So think, customer loyalty, getting rewards, discounts, early access from owning a physical product. Also lifecycle management. So when it comes to resale, repair, recycle, being able to use that chip to understand where to resell that product to and having authenticity on every resale transaction. But ultimately for the brand, it becomes more trackable. The idea that currently we live in a world where everyone is trying to build the next limited edition drop that drives value in the secondary market, that gets written about in hype beast, that has a bunch of influencers wearing it so they can stop the next drop. And in that, a lot of the value that's created from the brand happens beyond the buy button. They get a bunch of information from Shopify or whatever e-commerce platform they have of that data up until someone presses buy, who they are, how much time they spend on your website. But as soon as they purchase the product, you have no idea, how much value that actual product drives for you as a brand, out in the secondary market, out in the culture. And One of None is a business that exists to kind of quantify that value, to measure the magic of what the culture can actually do with the physical good.
So I came across this thing called the Goldilocks rule, which I thought was pretty fascinating. I think you might find this pretty fascinating too. Basically, it's this rule of thumb that humans experience peak motivation when they're working on something that's not too easy or not too hard. It's like right at kind of the perfect amount of difficulty for their skill set. As you look back on both your NFL career and now building a business, where do those things rank on that difficulty spectrum? And do you think that you found your Goldilocks with entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think that between One of None and my professional sports career, that One of None has definitely been a lot harder than being a pro athlete. There's no rules here. There's no structure. As I mentioned, that season in which you have, an off season, a training camp, a preseason, a season, a postseason, and then it starts over again. There's no one here to tell you what day to show up and at what time to show up. You get to go as long as you want, as hard as you want, and ultimately you have unlimited opportunity as your own business owner, specifically, in America. It's the American dream. In football, there's the difficulties definitely exist. Don't get me wrong. It's the top 1%. And within that, there's another, top 1% who actually can make life-changing money and be that top, athlete with the $100 million contract and ride off into a sunset that allows you to retire for the rest of your life. But that difficulty comes from more redundancy. That difficulty comes from being able to show up and have the same cycle year in and year out and, relearn the playbook, reintroduce yourself to the rookies, reintroduce yourself to the fans as who you're going to be for this season and how you're going to do differently, get bigger, faster, stronger in the middle of all of that. Yes, that's very difficult, but what I think is maybe a little different in business that I didn't have in football is that there's no rules. There's a million routes for One of None to go. We've already pivoted, enough to be a couple different businesses within one. Yet we've stayed alive. Yet we are, growing as a business, growing as a company, rolling out a product that is a very sophisticated technology product that can do a lot of different things. So for me, I wake up every morning now with a new agenda every day. I learn something new literally every day. I'm talking to the smartest people in the world, every day. I'm whether it's an investor or a big time business that we're trying to turn into a customer. And it's in those conversations that I still find that competitive spirit. It's in those conversations that I feel like I'm still growing, as a person. And it's in those conversations that I think that I can ultimately get the same success that a lot of my teammates are desiring, wealth that is long term, that can change your family life. So, where I'm at in my Goldilocks, I definitely put, football in a position that was, very difficult. It's definitely on the difficult side of the Goldilocks scale. If it's somewhere in between, difficult and easy to get done, but it definitely didn't, itch the intellect inside of me as much as I may have wanted it to compared to what I now get to do every day, running my own business.
I'm gonna give you a hypothetical, and I hope this makes sense. But let's say hypothetically, I told you that you were for sure going to play football and you're for sure going to become an entrepreneur. Given what you've learned, and let's say in this hypothetical, I'm able to tell you exactly what you're going to learn from each of these professions. Do you think that football would set you up better for business or business for football?
Football for business, by far. I wouldn't do anything any different. If you could tell me in another hypothetical scenario that I could leave Notre Dame and skip the NFL, but I could walk right into, a business idea that was going to make me $100 million, I still would, looking back, take the opportunity to go to football first. There's, in business, what I've learned is that the reason why a lot of athletes have had so much success in business and why they tend to get hired more than, someone who's not an athlete is because football creates the fundamentals that every business needs naturally in the sense of communication. You have in the football locker room, you have, in college, 85 guys, in the NFL, 63 guys, including the practice players, who are all from different places, who all tick differently, who all, compete differently, communicate differently, have different upbringings and different households, and you're required to come together as one to go and attack a mission. That's all that business ever aspires to do, is to get people to be inspired for something that's bigger than them, to ultimately grow. That's the only thing that matters in business is growth. It doesn't matter how successful you are, how much impact you have. The only way to judge a business is whether or not, their top line revenue went up, or at least their gross profit has gone up. So with that all being said, I think that, as I think about how sports has related to business, it's given me all of the fundamental tools that I could ever want to show up to my team, of about 10 people now, show up to my team, inspire them the same way I would inspire a huddle, try to communicate with them the same way I would try to communicate with all those different guys within that huddle, try to create structures around, goal setting the way that I would do within sports, to, challenge ourselves and push limits, to be a better person and set new standards and higher standards from what we did last week to what we're doing this week. All of those things would be, I couldn't imagine what it would be like to try to just climb the seniority ranks of some big, corporate America job, because I don't know if you would ever catch those lessons. You'd just be in the system, and the system would be the system, and you would just, trust that the guy above you understands that, what the system is. Well, in sports, and then going into true entrepreneurship and owning my own business, is that I see the rules of what success looks like in sports, and they seem to be the same exact rules of what success looks like in business. But this way, in this game, I get to go out there and, change the or find success the way that I want to find success versus a way that may have, be preset for me before I leave out there.
You talk about earlier, you mentioned wanting to be a role model, to kids who think that maybe, playing football or any sport or, creating music is the only way out. What would your advice be to those same kids now if they were sitting here in front of you and they said, DeShone, I really want to get into business. I want to try it. I just don't know how. I don't know where. I don't even know what the first step would be. What would your advice be?
You only know how to do business by doing business. My advice would be to remain curious, find something you're passionate about. Business is hard. Business is long. Business is stressful. Business lasts for way longer than you'd ever want it to last. It takes way longer to get there than you ever want it to take. And the only way to be able to ride the ups and downs of something that doesn't have the structure of a season, there is no cap this thing off at 0-16 and restart next year. 0-16 either goes to 0 and you fail, or 0-16 bounces to 16 and 32 because you just won the last 16 games in a row in business. So the only way to be able to ride that up and down is to do something you're passionate about, something that you love, and then do it in a way that only you can do it. Don't try to solve a problem the way that the other guy around you tried to solve the problem. Then there's no moat. There's no defense against the next person who tries to come in and separate themselves. For you, if you can come in and solve a unique problem that a market really needs to solve in a way that drives value for that business, and you do it in a way that only you can do it, that only your unique experiences allow you to do it, then opportunities are endless. The sky's the limit on how far you can take your business. The biggest and the best are all that way. There's not one business out there that's just, a robot that can, continue to show up and do things the same way every day. Every business has its own flair. It has its own touch. There's a bunch of people that have to go and communicate with other people to be able to get the job done. So the way to separate your people from their people is to inspire your people with experiences that only you, can share with them. So for me, you can imagine it's being a Midwest kid. It's being, a Notre Dame guy. It's being a professional athlete. It's being a car lover and collector. It's being a sneaker lover and collector. It's being a country music guy. It's about taking all of those experiences and applying it to my problem in a way that not one other person who has the same exact business with you, with the same exact tech stack can do it. That's where you find your success.
It's that quote that's like, it's like you should aspire to do really hard things, because if you succeed, it means other people probably can't copy you. And I heard that quote and I was like, oh shit, that makes
That's exactly it.
Because I honestly catch myself a lot of times because I'm like, man, you know, this podcasting thing is hard. It's hard to grow a podcast. It's hard to get guests, like all of that stuff. Like anything that you've heard about growing a podcast, it's true from someone who's done enough of these episodes. I think this is maybe my 30th episode, something like that. It's hard, but the fact that it is hard makes it exciting, because I know that not everyone is willing to go through, you know, the hard times to get to where you want to be one day. And the fact that it's hard makes it exciting, because that means that less people are likely to copy you. And so I think it ties in very well with what you said with finding your unique angle. You know, obviously there's the whole, you know, finding what the market needs, but also what can you provide that nobody else can. I think that's excellent advice.
I know you've probably also seen the meme of the gold miner or diamond miner, in which they're, you know, digging themselves through a hole, and, you know, he turns around, he's walking the other way, and he's, you know, one more hit away from getting to the diamond that they're at. You just got to see the diamond every day. You got to wake up and, you know, have the same vision, the same energy that you started it with. You know, when you're in your best, you know, state of mind, when you're thinking that you're doing your best as a podcaster, it's probably, you know, probably wasn't, you know, podcast 1, probably wasn't 2, 3, or 4, but you probably hit 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 like a beast. It's that energy that will take you through to, you know, the diamond on the other side of that, not the stalemate of, I'm just going to do it because it's another one that's in front of me, but rather, you know, whatever that big vision was, you got to keep that energy every time you walk into it. And that's what, you know, separates your podcast from any other podcast, or separate my business from any other business.
Dude, absolutely. That what you just said in terms of just finding, like, I reframe that as just having a positive mindset and finding the good. I think that's so important in business, or anything that you're trying to build, because there's so many things that will tell you that you're doing a bad job, or, you know, we discussed it earlier. There's so many people online who I'm sure would be happy as hell to tell you, hey, you're terrible, or this sucks, or whatever. But it's up to you to find, you know, small nuggets of positivity and really grasp onto those, because those at the end of the day are, you know, those small nuggets are going to be what motivate you through the tough times. It's like, you know, I could maybe focus on our technical difficulties that we were having at the beginning of this conversation. Or I could focus on the fact that I've enjoyed the past hour and 40 minutes, which is ridiculous, of talking to you. So it's all a mindset, man. I'm a huge believer in that. And I think you are too.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Definitely. And I appreciate you having me on, man. This is, it's been a pleasure. The quotes, the books, the analogies, you're clearly a well-read person to be able to come in. I'm learning a lot in this conversation. And, you know, there's no doubt in my mind that whatever you want this to be, it'll be that and much more.
I appreciate that, man. Before I let you go, we basically do this thing every episode. We end every episode with this little thing that we do. So I ask every guest for a piece of life advice that they'd like to leave for the next guest. The catch is that you don't know who the next guest is going to be. And so the last guest on our episode was Eddie Lack. He was a former NHL goalie for the Canucks. He's now a real estate agent in Scottsdale, Arizona. And his advice to you was live in the moment and don't try to chase the next thing all the time. First of all, what does that advice mean to you? And then what's the piece of advice you'd like to leave for our next guest?
Great, man. It's a word I've been working on just in the last couple of weeks here, and it's being present. You get so caught up with the next opportunity, the next deal, the next avenue that you can go down to try to make your next $1 million, and you tend to not appreciate the things that are sitting in front of you. The relationships you have, the friendships that you build, the places that you're at. I want a nice house, I want a nice car, I want to get back to the beach the way that I was as a professional quarterback, and sometimes that desire doesn't allow me just to appreciate exactly where I'm at here in Nashville, Tennessee, doing exactly what I'm doing, which is ultimately the dream that I've always had. So that was great advice. The advice that I would leave the next person would be, you never know who's watching. the thing that my dad, I think, said to me the most. Not that deep, not that sophisticated, but it's just a reminder that every micro decision that you make can have an impact that changes the world around you, whether it's, the pay it forward mentality of doing good things and good things will come back to you, whether it's, how you speak to someone, whether it's, how you present yourself in a meeting or an interview. You just never know who's watching. It could be your future wife's father. It could be the, future husband of your daughter. It could be, someone who's going through something that's way deeper than you could ever imagine. And with that, hopefully we'll allow that person to stay on their toes and continue to make those positive decisions as you mentioned before.
Love that. DeShone, before we log off, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm at DeShone Kizer on both X, known as Twitter, and Instagram. But mostly you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm hustling these days. So come look me up. Just DeShone Kizer. I'm on LinkedIn. Give one of done a follow. Show me some love. You're out there and you're building the brain, and you think that you got something special that you want to measure. Hit us up. We would love to put some chips inside your products and see if there's some magic that we can make.
Love it. DeShone, thanks so much for doing this. This has been amazing. Best of luck with the business. Can't wait to follow along your journey. You are amazing person, man. This has been an amazing conversation. So thanks so much for giving us an hour and 42 minutes of your time. And I'm sure we'll talk again real soon.